Okay, picture this. It's November 24th, 1971. A totally normal Northwest Orient Airlines flight takes off from Portland, just doing a quick 30-minute hop up to Seattle. The plane is pretty much empty, just 36 passengers and a crew of 6. Sitting quietly in the very back row, seat 18E, is this polite guy in a sharp business suit, white shirt, black tie. Honestly, he looks like your standard middle management executive. But as that plane climbs into the sky, this totally ordinary afternoon is about to turn into literally the greatest unsolved mystery in aviation history.
So the man hands a little note to a 23-year-old air hostess named Florence Schaffner. Now, Florence thinks he's just slipping her his phone number, trying to flirt. So she smiles, takes the note, and just tucks it away without even reading it. But then the man leans in and says, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Florence, understandably kind of skeptical, opens it up and sees those exact chilling words written in this incredibly neat handwriting. And just to prove he wasn't messing around, he cracks his briefcase open just enough for her to see this terrifying setup. Red cylinders, heavy wiring, a big battery. The threat was absolutely real.
Part 1. The 1971 Hijacking, a mysterious flight.
So let's dive right into how this man who simply introduced himself as Dan Cooper put his master plan into action.
His demands were just off the charts. He wanted $200,000 in cash, which was a massive fortune back then, 4 parachutes, a fuel truck waiting on the tarmac, and he made it crystal clear: no funny business, or the plane goes up in smoke. Florence sneaks this message up to the cockpit, and the airline president, Donald Nyrop, makes a huge call: full compliance. He decides to meet every single demand to protect the passengers and the company's reputation. So while the authorities on the ground are frantically scrambling to get the cash together, the pilots casually announce a minor technical difficulty. The other 36 passengers just sit there, totally oblivious, as the plane circles for 3 grueling hours.
Now, the FBI wasn't just going to hand over bags of untraceable cash. They made a super strategic countermove right out of the gate. They secured that $200,000 using very specific $20 bills from an emergency bank reserve. And they recorded every single serial number. Keep that detail in mind, because those numbers are going to be the absolute key to this entire case later on.
Moving right along to Part 2, Vanishing Act, into thin air. The plane finally touches down in Seattle at 5:46 p.m. The cash and parachutes are loaded up, and true to his word, Cooper lets all the passengers and most of the crew go. But we're just getting started. The plane refuels and takes right back off into the night sky, carrying only the pilots, Cooper, and one hostage, an air hostess named Tina Mucklow.
Once they're airborne, he gives the pilots this incredibly specific and honestly super dangerous flight plan. He tells them to head toward Mexico City at exactly 10,000 feet, set the wings at a 15-degree angle, and fly as slow as the plane possibly can without stalling out. The pilots actually warned him, like, hey, flying like this is going to burn way too much fuel to reach Mexico. But Cooper? He didn't care. It was obvious he knew exactly what he was doing.
And here is where things get truly cinematic. Cooper orders Tina to lock herself inside the cockpit. He's totally alone in the cabin now. And then he does something you could only really pull off on a Boeing 727 back then. He opens the back staircase right in the middle of the flight. At exactly 8:13 p.m., the pilots feel this violent sudden upward jolt, and they have to basically wrestle the controls to level the plane out. When they finally land in Nevada and the cops rush in, the cabin is totally empty. The guy just vanished into the pitch-black night, leaving behind nothing but his tie, a gold tie clip, a couple of cigarette butts, and 66 fingerprints.
Part 3. Who is D.B. Cooper? A reporter's mistake. Let's take a quick breather from the action for a second. You might be wondering, if the guy introduced himself as Dan Cooper, why on earth does the entire world call him DB?
Well, it all comes down to a psychological quirk known as the anchoring effect. See, a reporter named James Long was frantically rushing to break the story before his deadline. He's on the phone with his police source, and he just straight up mishears them. The cops said Dan Cooper, but Long heard and printed DB Cooper. And because human brains rely so heavily on the very first piece of information we hear, the public anchored onto DB as the absolute truth.
It's actually a textbook example of Brandolini's law, or the bullshit asymmetry principle. Basically, once a piece of false info is out there, the energy it takes to correct it is just monumental. Other news stations started repeating the mistake, and within a day, D.B. Cooper was legendary. The real alias was completely erased from history over a bad phone connection.
Part 4, did he survive? The impossible jump. Now, let's pivot and look at the actual forensics here. What were the sheer odds of surviving a jump like this? Did this guy actually make it to the ground alive?
Just think about this for a second. 10 kilograms. That is the physical weight this guy was dealing with. He literally strapped 10 kilos, about 22 pounds, of solid cash right to his body. And then he jumped into the pitch-black night, into a freezing November rainstorm, wearing loafers and a business suit. He's dropping into 320-kilometer-per-hour winds over this totally rugged landscape of pine forest and freezing lakes. Honestly, investigators at first were like, there's no way. If he hit the water, it's instant hypothermia.
But what's really fascinating here is what happened next. In the months after Cooper's heist, at least 5 other guys tried to copy him. 5. And men like Martin McNally jumped at way faster speeds, while Richard LaPointe jumped right into freezing snow. And guess what? They survived. Both of them. When the FBI compared those brutal conditions to Cooper's, they had this huge realization. Surviving that jump wasn't just a crazy pipe dream, it was actually highly probable.
Part 5. Clues and Suspects. A 45-year manhunt. Once the FBI realized he likely survived, they went all in. They scoured the drop zone, knocked on doors at local farms, and literally hired a submarine to search the bottom of Lake Merwin looking for a parachute or, a body.
But for a long, long time, we're talking decades of absolutely frustrating dead ends. They plastered those serial numbers everywhere, offering rewards, but nothing turned up. It really looked like the perfect crime. Until, slowly, these incredible little breakthroughs started piercing through the mystery years after the fact.
The first massive plot twist drops in 1979. An airline pilot named Tom Bohan tells the FBI, hey, your drop zone math is totally wrong because you didn't factor in the extreme wind drift that night. He points them to the Washougal River area. And sure enough, a few months later, an 8-year-old boy digging in the sand on the Columbia River uncovers 3 bundles of rotting cash, $5,800 in total. And the serial numbers? A perfect match. Crazy little side note, when that kid grew up, he auctioned off just 15 of those exact bills for $37,000.
Then, fast forward to 2009, and modern science steps up to the plate. A team of experts takes that golden tie clip he left behind and puts it under an electron microscope. They actually find these microscopic particles of unalloyed titanium, aluminum, and antimony. This was a total game changer. Back in '71, you couldn't just find those materials anywhere. They were highly restricted to advanced chemical or aeronautical plants. It strongly suggested Cooper wasn't just some random guy. He had high-level engineering access. He might have literally been an employee at Boeing itself.
So over the years, the FBI looked into more than 800 suspects, but it really boiled down to a few major players. You had Richard McCoy, a Vietnam vet who pulled off an almost identical skyjacking just 5 months later. But the FBI found evidence putting him in Vegas on the night Cooper jumped, so scratch that, he's out. Then there's Robert Rackstraw, also a veteran, totally comfortable with aircraft and explosives, and he even looked just like the FBI sketches. He used to joke with reporters about being the hijacker. But again, they just couldn't pin down that definitive, rock-solid proof, and they dropped him from the list in '79. Part 6. An Unsolved Mystery. The case closes. Despite getting so unbelievably close, the hard proof always just slipped through their fingers. In 2016, this big documentary and book come out, practically screaming that Robert Rackstraw was undeniably D.B. Cooper. But curiously, literally the very next day after that book release, the FBI made a huge announcement. They were officially, permanently closing the case to focus resources elsewhere.
Which brings us right to the end of this explainer, staring at the ultimate question. It remains the only unsolved skyjacking in aviation history. We know exactly how he did it. We know the insane skill and absolute nerve it required. But after meticulously executing this perfect crime and vanishing into a freezing, pitch-black storm, did the man we call D.B. Cooper actually live to spend the money?